Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? If so, here's your sign. I'm Sarah Heater, the host of Big Brave Business, and I also own a podcast production and strategic consultation company called Podfox Media. My team offers a 100% free strategy session that is completely private between you or you and your co-host and one of our industry-leading specialists. We'll tell you everything about podcasting today, the market, what it takes to get started, and all the ways your podcast could look. And there's even time for you to ask any questions you have about podcasting. If that sounds like something that you need to do because starting a podcast has been on your list for months or even years, book your call today. Again, 100% free. Launchmyshow.com. That's launchmyshow.com. Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heater, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Big Brave Business podcast. I have some familiar voices on this episode with me today. We're talking about intersectionality today. And before we dig into the big question of the day, let me go ahead and give you a quick introduction to all of the voices that you're hearing on the episode. So if you're new here, welcome. Thank you for joining us for Big Brave Business. My name is Sarah Heater. I'm the host of Big Brave Business, and I'm also the founder of Podfox Media, which is a podcast production and strategic consultation company.
Hi, I'm Allie Cameron. I am a disabled woman, physically disabled woman and wheelchair user. I run the Seated Perspectives account, which started as disability advocacy and is now evolving into a business where I support other disabled women, creators, and entrepreneurs to build their own brands.
Hi, everyone. I am Palaska Ramirez. I empower first-generation women to thrive beyond their ancestors' dreams. I am the founder of Generation Fearless, the nonprofit dedicated to supporting first-gen women, and the Fearless Impact Collective, a consulting agency helping middle managers be multilingual, meaning through different cultures as well as generations.
Hi, I'm Erin Perkins. I'm the founder of Mabel EQ. I am deafblind. That's often confusing people because I can speak and I look like I can see. I can see central vision. I educate business owners how to build accessibility into their business without the overwhelm because a lot of people, when they think accessibility is just your website, but I teach them that it really goes beyond that.
Thank you so much for being here and joining me. I'm so looking forward to digging into this with all of you again. Conversations with you are always so good. And yeah, we had a really good accessibility conversation, but I just want to make a note of something that I did not engage with yesterday, but did today. And that is on Threads, which if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you guys know that's my favorite social media platform. I posted a picture last night without thinking, just posted it in the middle of the night. And this morning I posted a different one. And when I posted it this morning, I noticed how easy they've made it on Threads to add alt text. And I went ahead and added the description of the image that I added this morning. I did not do that last night, didn't even notice it, right? Which is just such an ableist way of moving through the world. Like, of course I didn't have to think about it, right? But I'm curious before we get into today's actual big question, and I do not want this to derail us, but have any of you navigated Threads with a screen reader? Because I'm curious if it's navigable.
No, because one, I know that person trying to use a screen reader would be very impossible for me because I'd be like, what the hell are you saying? Sorry. But I do know a few people who use screen readers, and for them, they said it is navigable, but I feel like they just have to figure what's the best way for them to navigate it.
Right.
So it's every blind person, every user of the screen reader navigate things very differently from each other. That's why it's really important for us to try to create a good experience. Doesn't matter how you interact with it. That's like what's really important here.
Yeah, I'm interested because I think it's neat that they made it easy to add really good alt text. And I wrote quite a description. I didn't find like too much of a character limit or anything like that, which I thought was really seemed really helpful, but it's hard for me to know what's helpful. I mean, how does that actually work, right? But before we get too distracted, and I think that this is related, right? But before we get too distracted, today's big question is, what role does intersectionality play in entrepreneurship, and how can businesses address multiple barriers at once?
Big question. I've been actually sort of thinking about this quite a bit because obviously, as I'm exclusively serving other disabled women, primarily in the work that I'm doing, I'm sort of taking the time to really engage with the advice that's out there for a lot of entrepreneurship and business and social media and how to show up. And so much of it is ableist and like designed for the cis white men who lead hustle culture, created hustle culture because it makes sense for them. But a lot of the advice that's out there doesn't make sense for disabled people. And what I find super interesting is like, to me, entrepreneurship is probably one of the most accessible forms of income generation available to me because I get to do it in my own space. I already have sort of accommodations like my needs from an accessibility standpoint are met here in my own home, but still, like, there are so many barriers still that exist within that ecosystem of entrepreneurship. So yeah, I don't think I have the answers necessarily as to how we fix it, but it is a really sort of present thing for me as a disabled woman or a woman living at the intersections of womanhood and disability, that so much of the advice that is out there doesn't exist. So it sort of needs to come from us as we reshape what that can look like.
It's funny because I've actually been in the conversation space for the past month, and my argument usually end up being with the white male. And it really like pisses me off so much. But I also recognize that I have privilege as a white woman. So I'm trying to find that balance. And the thing is like intersectionality is not optional. Like, but at the same time, I feel like I can like project myself as a white, straight, hearing person just by looking at me, but you would never know that I have disabilities unless you actually met me in real life, and then those disabilities would be super clear. So, like, I recognize that I have that privilege to be able to just be that person. But the problem with the businesses, how do they address that? And honestly, stopping doing that one size fits all. There is no one size fits all solution. It's not possible. Like, you can do it in a way that is still layered and nuanced, that addresses and appeals to most people. So it's really, I believe it's going beyond that checkbox. Companies need to stop just wanting to do that checkbox for meeting diverse, equity, inclusion higher. And that is truly a challenge for a lot of those companies, especially in today's political landscape.
I always talk about, I love intersectionality because I always say that's the superpower. If you want to know what your superpower is, it's your intersectionality, because it is how we have to navigate based on the different multitudes of barriers, right? So we have been able to do that, myself specifically as a Latina woman, first generation, you know what I mean, low income, being able to navigate the barriers when I walk into a space. You guys can't, well, you guys can see me, but the rest can't. I have my big poofy hair. I'm walking into a space. I cannot hide who I am. I mean, I know I don't want to either. I want to walk in the space and take up this space, but I am comfortable in that. So I think that if organizations, like you were saying, Erin, before, of it, the cookie cutters models for everything no longer works when we have such a diverse working space, and diverse in what we can see, but in diverse in how you're saying what we cannot see and how we're navigating. Because you may look at someone and you don't know that they may be a single parent, or that they have any other challenges that they're navigating on the emotional wellness, on the financial side, on the home side, any of that. So I think it's for managers to take the time to be human, right? And you were talking about, Ali, in this hustle culture, we need to produce, and KPIs and all these things are important. And I'm not saying that they're not, right? Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society and it is what it is. But in order to truly manage and support your team, there has to be a human element in that. And no, I can't make accommodations for every single thing, but they're legal accommodations that I need to make. And in the areas that I can't make accommodation, I can still be human and I can still have the conversation. And I think that's what gets lost, right? Because it's what people don't see, but it's not my experience. So I'm going to keep it moving. Or this is someone's sob story, or like, oh, poor X, Y, and Z. And you were able to get here so far, so you can figure it out. And I think that's the hard challenge, because we're so resilient, right? Because of the barriers and the intersectionality, people forget that has been crying and praying and support and a tribe of people around us to be able to navigate some spaces. So if they can just do human, I would appreciate that.
I love that you brought up the concept of resilience. It's something I talk about often. And I mean, for me, as someone who sustained an injury and became disabled at a young age, I talk about resilience as like, yes, I'm resilient. I've had to be, like, there is no choice but to be resilient. Like, that's just the reality. But what if I didn't have to be? And then it's like, how do we start reimagining the world in a way that, like, disabled folks or intersectional folks don't have to be resilient all the time? And how do we, like, okay, yes, we operate in a capitalistic system, but how do we reframe the ways of getting there so that they are accessible to different folks, or they are equitable, or they are softer? Like, the reality of capitalism is that it's not soft. It's a very harsh and hard existence. And for me, like, I grew up in a family that's very productivity oriented, and that's just, I mean, the reality of it. And the last few years, even as I step into entrepreneurship, has been unlearning a lot of that stuff, a lot of those taught systems, so that I can exist in a place where I am still contributing. And I think that's the way of sort of shifting it, is like, how are we contributing versus how are we, like, being productive? How are we choosing to contribute as well? Like, that element of choice, I think, is so important. And yeah, I think that's the sort of revolutionary aspect of it all.
That's exactly what I was thinking, actually, from Erin, when you mentioned the check boxes for DEI, is that I think one of the opportunities that we have in entrepreneurship and running our own businesses is that we get to make all of the decisions, where that's overwhelming, but that also means all of the things that we are learning and unlearning, we get to apply. Whereas when you're in a corporate environment, there's so much you can't control. And so even when you know something is wrong or not inclusive or inaccessible, on a previous episode, Ali shared an entire job she had where she couldn't access an entire floor of the company that she worked for. And I think that, like, that's an example of, there were people at that company who knew that was messed up, but their power to control that aspect of the environment is zero, right? So I think the exciting part about entrepreneurship is that we get to do better when we learn how to do better. That's also a big responsibility, though.
That's the thing. And like, I'm a woman in my 40s. I've had to advocate for myself all these years. It, I worked for corporate for 12 years, And there were often times like, do you really need an interpreter? Yeah. Like, especially when there's more than 2 or 3 people talking. I'm, like, lucky. I can get away without an interpreter if it's one-on-one or one-on-two. But when you have a whole team of people, there are 10 people talking, I'm gonna miss out 50% of that conversation. And no, I cannot freaking lip read. Like, no, I can't. And I let them get away with it. But now I own my own business. I have to find that balance of speaking out and basically feeling like I'm dreaming into the void, like, no, that is not right. No, you cannot freaking do that. And then I also have that mindset of like, oh my God, I am exhausted. I am tired of having to constantly advocate for myself. I am tired of having to be like not having the option to be able to go and buy a ticket to a magic show that I want to see because I need to request an interpreter. I can't just do things spontaneously. I am tired. I can't participate in the fast action ticket to go to a conference, but I need to like double check with them and make sure that they will provide accessibility for me. I am freaking tired. I'm sorry, but I am tired. But no, I'm not sorry because I've done this for 40 plus years.
Well, you mentioned, I think it was Ali before, about productivity, right? And that's at the end of the day is how people see it. But the nerve to ask, I cannot even fathom saying, do you really need an interpreter? Like, who are you to even ask the question? Like, if this is a need, it is a need. And that's what it is. We have such a hard time having empathy and sitting in other people's shoes. And we're like, oh, if I don't understand that it's not needed or not important, and if you can't produce how I produce, then it's a problem. We were talking about, actually, me and my partner earlier, about in cultural, for so many of us culturally, sitting and resting is not a thing. That equals laziness. If you were sitting, why are you resting? Why are you sleeping in? That does not exist. And I'm like, this is going back down to, like, at least for my people, to slavery. This is our value comes from productivity. So you're supposed to, so we're talking about generations later that, like, if you are not doing and producing, but that adds how we show up at work, how we manage other folks, because we're supposed to be producing. And I'm trying to, right, get into a space, me personally, and the woman that I work with, of my existence is enough. I woke up this morning and I showed up, and that is absolutely enough. But it is so hard, right? As being entrepreneurs, are trying to navigate, because showing up is not enough when we got a business. Showing up is not enough when we are advocating and we're trying to do so much. But you're right, there's moments that we're so tired. I am tired of having to speak to folks about why you need holistic boarding procedures at a job, right? Because no, everyone doesn't know what that means. Everybody is in third, fourth generation. And how I'm advocating for that, I can imagine how hard it's advocating for, no, everyone does not have the ability to walk into and accept a meeting, a late meeting, because you need an interpreter. So no, you can't spring a meeting on me, like, or a trip or something like that. And I think it's sad that we need to have these conversations, because to me, it's basic human, like, empathy and having understanding that I have challenges, someone may have a different challenge, and how do I feel in the middle? I don't know. I just can't believe they asked you.
I think it's also important to talk about like what the ramifications are of this, because it doesn't just exist in the small ecosystems of like work. I mean, we look at the UK right now, where like the government is talking about pulling or reducing who gets access to PIP payments, which are support for disabled folks. And there's it's coming from the Labour Party, the party of work, and they're all about like, we want to get more disabled folks into working environments. And it's like, that's not the point of these payments. These payments are supporting people to cover the costs of disability, which are significant. I think in the UK, it's like people spend £1,000 more a month if they are disabled, because they need their mobility aids, they need medication, whatever it might be that isn't covered. And that's what, like, sometimes these payments are supporting people in getting to work. So like, the systems are so flawed, and because like work and productivity is the epitome of success, like it's used as the way to shape these conversations. And then that concept you were talking about, Palaska, of laziness becomes like the trope that is like used to speak about disability. It's like, oh, they're not contributing, and then sort of bringing intersectionality into it more is like, well, if these disabled folks can work, why can't the others? And like, even within disability, like the levels of intersectionality are so huge because there are so many different experiences of disability. And I mean, even within the same condition. So I think that aspect of being human, being curious, asking questions, understanding, asking non-intrusive questions, I will add, like very carefully, is so important to just expand our understanding of the different experiences of humanity.
I think that's number one. A reason why I'm so grateful. I have so much gratitude to you for joining me, all of you for joining me for this conversation and conversations like these, because it is really intrusive to ask questions of people you don't know. So, an outlet like this, where someone is volunteering perspective, information, etc., you get to kind of be nosy and learn and whatnot without inserting yourself into their space or into their life. But I also wanted to say, if it's this challenging for work, for businesses to be inclusive to the more clearly, I guess I'll say obvious, that feels like it doesn't capture what I'm trying to say, but the more visible aspects of intersectionality and inclusion, then what about the invisible ones, right? Or the ones that are based on biases that are unconscious. So, Palaska, you mentioned kind of this laziness trope, and we know statistically that that bias doesn't just exist within people about themselves. It's also an external perception that people of color, especially Black people and especially Black women, are going to be the most harshly judged for their levels of productivity or perceived laziness. And I think we add so many other things to that, like what language you grew up speaking at home or is spoken in your household. And so maybe you do speak English, but that doesn't mean that that's your like first language or your most clear, easiest communication, or any other like cultural element that might come into play. So if it's that challenging where someone's going to question whether you really need an interpreter, then what are the extra layers of the complications of addressing like the intersectional identities that we all have that are even less visible and even harder to understand what's happening, because we're getting more information all the time with things like neurodivergence and all of the neurodiversity that is out there. Like, there's already so much more information just than from when my kids were young, right? They're learning about themselves on TikTok from other adults who are learning about themselves, right? And I think that there's so much information they have now that if they had navigating like school, then that could have helped set them up for success. So I think my point here just, well, I mean, there's a lot of points, but one of my points here just being that intersectionality encompasses a lot, a lot of things. And yeah, how do we as business owners try to think about all of them? And I say this as like a white, able-bodied, cisgender, heteronormative like woman. How do we try to incorporate all of the intersections?
It's funny because some when I first started my business 7 years ago, I just saw myself as a deaf woman. I hadn't truly identified myself as a deaf-blind woman until probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And that was such a hard identity for me to like connect with because I was like, but I can still see. But there have been things that have happened to me that made me realize, yeah, when I travel, I have to use the white cane because otherwise something will happen to me. And it did happen to me when I was in Copenhagen. I tripped and fell because I didn't see something, and I ended up in the emergency room because, like, I didn't see it. So it's weird for me to kind of be like, I can navigate the world pretty decently. But then there are other situations where I'm like, yeah, I can't do this. And being disabled had and a woman had often meant that people underestimated me. And then I have people out there like, oh, when they see what I do, like, oh my God, that's so inspirational. You're educating businesses on accessibility. It makes me so mad. I'm like, but yeah, you say I'm inspirational, but you're not hiring me because you don't see that accessibility as a necessity. And that is what's really challenging about doing my business. Like, I will say the last month or so, I've been doubting myself a lot. And I'm like, maybe I need to go work for someone else for a while just to get through this time right now. Because everything has been feeling like it's a lot.
Thanks for sharing that, Erin. I think I've been in a similar boat in the last few months, and it's hard to get over. I think, yeah, sort of leaning on community ends up being the best thing. I think it's the antidote to everything, honestly. Yeah. Sarah, your question was around how do we like serve all these different intersectional identities? And I think honestly, humility is one of the biggest tools in our belts. Like we obviously know what our own experience is in whatever sort of intersections we sit in, and we can do as much as we can to learn about other people's experiences, but we should never go into any conversation assuming anything, assuming ability, assuming experience, assuming knowledge, assuming anything. So that's sort of something that I try to incorporate into everything, and also just sort of starting to reshape how we deliver offerings and services and stuff as well based on what we learn about our audiences too. For instance, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but episode I was on, but I, for instance, in my coaching offer don't have limits on when people can use their calls by. And that's just to accommodate disabled folks who have different things happen or different levels of energy, or like might not be able to do a call a week for 4 weeks, but might need to spread it out over 3 months or even a year. Like that's just the reality of people who are living with a disability. So I think it's, yeah, adjusting our models and not always existing within that like hyper productive, always income generating capitalistic ideals, and reshaping them from within.
Can we talk about gender and entrepreneurship? Because obviously there's a lot of like tech bro entrepreneurs. That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about the commonality of this girl boss movement and entrepreneurship, and how many well-meaning people lean all the way in on specifically, I serve women, this is a community for women, but women come in a lot of shapes and sizes and life experiences, etc. And where does that leave people who do not feel safe or included in a space that's specifically for women? Because they're not safe with the tech bros either. So where does that leave? I think, where does that leave us when we're thinking about, I love being a woman. That's how I identify. I love other women. That's definitely true. I grew up in Girl Scouts. I also am a lifetime member. I have another podcast that's for Girl Scout troop leaders. And this is something that in more recent years I've really struggled with Girl Scouts, because just even the name of the organization is not inclusive, and they have really progressive for their time of coming out with a statement as far as gender goes, which is that any child in the age range that they serve, which is grades K to 12 in the States, so like 5 to 18 basically, that if they identify as a girl and are living life as a girl, then they are welcome and included in Girl Scouts. That's the like official statement. And then as far as members who are enrolled by their parents at 5, who come out with any number of gender spectrum identities, right? Once a Girl Scout, always a Girl Scout. So if you have been a Girl Scout, as long as you want to stay and feel included and safe in your troop, you can stay and participate fully, right? And I think that that is good, but I don't think it's great. And I mean, I think okay, there's a lot about it that's great, but I don't think it's enough. And I think that in my own like branding and marketing, this has been an interesting kind of thing to walk the line on really trying to be inclusive when it comes to gender. So I don't know what's coming up for you all, thinking about all of the different ways gender comes up in entrepreneurship.
So I'll jump in because Generation Fearless, right, is for first generation women. And I am a girly girl, y'all. I am like sorority girl, nails, pink dress. That is me. But that is not how we function with Generation Fearless. No different than we had to define what first generation was for us, right? And looking at all the definitions and saying, hey, first generation is anyone in their immediate family to navigate a new space, because that is different. It is not just the first gen college. It's sometimes a first gen entrepreneur, and sometimes it's the first gen American, and sometimes it's the first gen in a different sector, right? Your parents went to college, but they're teachers, and now you're in tech. And you are a woman navigating this fully by yourself without that point of reference. So the threads, as Gabby would say, are still the same, right? We're still having the same challenges. So I think for us it's specifically for Generation Fearless, right? It's someone that identifies, and like you said, identifies as a woman and lives life as a woman. And that may look very different in our spaces. I think that that's one of the things that I'm most proud of with us, because we have from sometimes college students to retirees from all different backgrounds, all different identities, those that identify as they, them, and those that might look at me as being fully girly and saying, Pulaski, you're doing too much. And that is not who I am. But that's not who we want in the space. I'm not serving different versions of myself, right? And neither is my board, right? One of my founding board members is an Egyptian woman, Muslim, who's been a friend for a very long time. And we have even a session where we talk about the similarities, because we're completely different, right, from the outside. But at the same time, we're all the same. But understanding more, like our calendar looks a little bit differently, because I'm including all the holidays, because I want to be conscious when I'm doing something. Our regular calendar has Christmas and Easter and all this other stuff, but there's Ramadan. And what does it look like now that we're in Ramadan? The energy levels and being conscious of that, right? And looking at all these other components. So to me I'm opening the door to anybody that identifies as a woman and anybody that identifies as first gen by their own even definition, but understanding that that may look completely different. And that might be someone that walks in the space not presenting as a woman. And as long as they feel comfortable and safe in the space, we've had men come to our events because they're a partner, or I love the message and it relates to me. To me, it's making sure that we're serving and being kind and being empathetic.
Yeah, making sure that we're serving, I think, is my question. And the holidays is a great example, but how do you do that when you have created like a mission statement that is specifically first generation women? How do you ensure that then the messaging, the marketing, and then the community, once people do come in the door, how do you ensure that you're creating a space that is inclusive when it comes to gender?
I think that there are some parts that it is hard, right? Because we're talking about our lived experience as women, where we have sessions talking about infertility and talking about navigating motherhood and navigating culture. So I think there are some topics that are very hard for us to do that, because we're navigating and having those conversations, because there aren't spaces to be able to have these conversations, especially when we look at first generation. The majority, we're looking at, I think it's, if I'm not wrong, we're looking at 60% identified marginalized community. About almost 90% are also that low income background. So we're looking at that intersectionality of not just being first gen, but having all these cultural challenges and expectations, not just put by society, but our homes and our communities, specifically, let's say to something like infertility, and having those conversations. I think for us is just it's not, and I think we talked about it last time, it's not the oppression Olympics. We're not sitting there saying that who has it better or worse. It's acknowledging the intersectionality of the barriers, right? So yes, I have certain challenges, but I know that I am Afro-Latina, but my experience is not the same as a dark-skinned woman. they might be Latino. And I know that like if your experience as straight hair, someone that is white presenting is going to look different. It's not that it's less or more, but there's different barriers when I walk in with my hair like this, my red lipstick and my hoops, and this is who I am, and I'm walking in, but I need to be prepared of how I'm going to be perceived. That's going to be look very different. I have to prove myself different than Sarah walking in a room. That is just a reality, but it's understanding that and creating that space, I think, is what is important. That it's not a competition. We all have different challenges, and there's so many challenges and barriers, like you were mentioning earlier, that we don't see. Looking at who is sitting in the room and has high levels of anxiety and is right now having a hard time, or who is in critical chronic pain that has to stand and walk around a room. Like there's all these things. So I think if you're conscious of that, you just create an inclusive space of, okay, somebody might have to walk around, somebody may not be able to concentrate for this long, and trying to always mold to the different spaces, not just, okay, in this format. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about my experience as a more like I'm still obviously a smaller business at this point and really relating to people more one-to-one. So for me, it's like I know that I want to serve primarily disabled women. Obviously, gender nonconforming folks fit within that. To me, it's like I don't know if I relate to men in the same way and that I can be as valuable in that sense. I do come at things with a softer, more like intuitive approach than many men that I've sort of know exist in the world. And so I think that's just sort of, I make sure that I infuse me into my messaging, because at the end of the day, I want clients who want to work with me as who I am and what I bring to the table. And if that happens to be a man who is more intuitive or who is more like leaning into the softer side of life, then that's great. And I have had a couple of clients and I was like surprised when they signed up, because I was like, I'm not talking to you. Why? Like, what? But then like the relationship is totally fine and fruitful for them, and that's exciting. But I think it's just like, yeah, shaping the messaging so that if you have a sense of who you're trying to reach and what they'll relate with you with, and yeah, where they might find like a place to land, and then that's all you can be. And I think that's just a really cool element of inclusion, is like taking an approach that really, I don't know, yeah, leans into the humanity. I think Palaska brought that up really beautifully earlier. Is just like being a human, a kind human is such an important part of it. And I think it's really cool to see more entrepreneurs, more business owners really leading with that and having that be a core element of how they show up. I think it's changing things. It's really cool.
So I don't necessarily specifically market my business to women, but I do think I naturally draw women. But it's funny because, to my surprise, I drew this one guy that he was like, I want to hire you. I want you to be a consultant for my business. And I was like, I don't know about that. But the more I talked to him, I understood why he wanted to hire me, because he knew the way he spoke didn't always come across to the clients they brought in. And a lot of their clients are government, like more. And he needed someone like me to kind of make the language more human, because he didn't know how to do that. And that was like, that had been a very fascinating experience for me, because I definitely feel like I connect more to women, but there's always like some of those people that I can connect with that are not just women. However, I will say that when it comes to finding community, I do feel more safer when I'm in a community of women. However, it has been a lot more trickier now trying to find that space, because there are those girl bros, that the girly boxes that make 7, 8 figures, that do make me feel like I'm less than, because I'm not dressing like them, I don't look like them, I don't have long blonde hair. It's stereotypical. But then I have to remember that they can't next they don't maybe I need to look at them from a human perspective before judging them by the cover of what they look like. And I think that's what we all need to do is when I first started my business, pink pink was the and girl boss was the language that was used for people to connect with each other. But now, 7 years later, I'm seeing a much more wider range. I'm seeing women use different colors. Some are like going bold, dark colors. Others are still like keeping those soft colors. So it's really interesting to see that there's a lot more variety in today's when women are being entrepreneurs. It's not just fitting into that pink stage.
Yeah, I think you pose a lot of interesting things to think about. And one thing that has been interesting for me in my own reflections really is about the community that I'm spending time in. And I think so obviously I have a lot of experience, as I mentioned, with Girl Scouts. And although they have a lot of examples, social examples of being inclusive, generally speaking, I think the statistics still speak for themselves. It's an upper middle class white lady, white girl organization, right? Christian oriented. The programming itself, just to dispel any myth that of somebody who doesn't know, the program itself is not Christian, but it's a lot of Christian girls, a lot of troops meet in churches, and so on and so forth. So I have that experience. I've also talked a lot about getting involved with NAWBO, the National Association of Women Business Owners, this past year. I love it, but really I'm also very aware of how many people I love and would love to spend time with and would love to get to know better who aren't going to be welcome or included or safe in an environment like that. I think I'm drawn to groups and organizations and conferences and things for women because well, first of all, I can fit into a lot of those spaces. I do have a lot of the like kind of passing criteria to be included in those social groups. So that's a bit easier for me. I have that privilege, but then also because I know there aren't going to be tech bro dudes there. And that's really, I'm just trying to avoid a certain specific type of person. It's not so much that I only want to hang out with people like, not, I don't only want to say like me, but I don't only want to hang out with people who have the same privileges I do. I actually want to diversify the spaces that I'm spending time in, but that's complicated too because spaces that are specifically not for me are not for me, and I am 100% okay with that. I think that that's necessary. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that it's been interesting working on kind of the brand identity for Big Brave Business because it's easy for me to say it's for millennial women because that's what I am, right? But the reality is that a lot of people who I am very close friends with in business are not millennials. And I do know that women is not an inclusive term, even though I think a lot of us who identify as women mean it as an inclusive term when we say it, right? So when I'm working on the Big Brave Business kind of brand elements, as I'm trying to develop that out more to be able to do some more marketing, et cetera, I'm trying to be really, I think the holidays is a really great point, Paul Aska. And I'm also trying to be really mindful of like who's represented in any kind of stock imagery that's being used. And just conversations like this have given me a lot more, I think, presence of mind to think about who's being included in the imagery. And that's something that I have done with Podfox since the beginning, where I made it a priority from day one that there's going to be diverse races, that there's going to be diverse ages in our stock photos. Like that's a non-negotiable. It's in our brand guidelines. Like you're not going to see a Podfox branded image that's ever just the white ladies with the long blonde hair. Like that's not ever gonna be the go-to imagery, because it isn't attracting the diversity that is important to us. Now I know that that is also just one performative way, and that there's so much more to like serving diverse groups of people, and I absolutely know that. But that's like one thing that's been, what signal am I sending? Like what? And again, when you're working for somebody else, you don't get to have creative control over these things. But when you're an entrepreneur, you get to think about this. So I just think, I don't know, for me, that's something that has been a priority.
I think there's a really interesting flip side to this, and it's something that I've started incorporating in the last 6 months, I want to say, where I've started taking a lot more ownership around the fact that I am an entrepreneur. I deserve to take up space in spaces that aren't designed for me, but are designed for entrepreneurs. So what does that look like? And like in October, I went to a conference for copywriters and business owners. And that was a big jump for me. Like, I don't like big spaces that are networking events because, like, I feel small. I feel like I'm not seen. I need to navigate like discomfort of crowds and like people not. Anyway, it's not my scene. But I was like, no, I deserve to be here accessing the same connections, accessing the same knowledge, resources, like all of these things, which often we are, as disabled folks, barred out of because we don't see ourselves in those spaces or they're not catered to us. But by going and taking up space, I was able to sort of look around and be like, okay, these are the things that you guys did as organizers that weren't accessible to me. And I sent them to them. And like, it was received really well because there is that element of people not knowing what they don't know. And I don't want to put the responsibility on people who live under systems of oppression, because that's not the vibe. But there is an element of like, okay, if you have the energy to do it, you can sort of educate the people who are creating these spaces. And obviously they will take it, they will not. That's entirely up to them at the end of the day. But they have the responsibility, once they have that information, to make a change. And then it's really interesting going to an event after with the same organizers where maybe they're doing the same thing. And then you bring it up again. And it's like there's an opportunity to do that educating. And again, it has to be if you feel comfortable doing it, if you feel like you have the energy to do it, if you feel like, yeah, like it's attainable to you, because the reality is that you might not have the energy or you might not feel comfortable, and you get to choose your comfort. Like that's, I think, the thing that I want to reiterate to everyone all the time is like, we don't have a responsibility to educate, but if there's an opportunity to, and you feel comfortable doing it, go for it. But you get to make that choice. And I think that's something, yeah, that's becoming more prevalent for me, but really creating an interesting dynamic with organizers in my city here in Vancouver, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to be here. Like you need to make that work, and you need to start learning what that looks like to create your spaces and events in a way that's successful.
It's funny because I'm going to a conference, and this is the third time I'm attending a conference. And I've also discovered that the organizer is still hiring only student interpreters. And I'm like, I have been, the first year I gave you leeway because I was like, I get it. It's your first time doing the conference. Like, I can make this work. The second year, we're like, okay. But like, when I discovered that she was spending a high four figures to attend a conference for herself and still hiring student interpreters and not paying them, it made me very livid. Like I'm actually genuinely like nervous to attend the conference, even though this is the third year I'm going, because like I want and need to say something to her, because I'm like, I recognize you're a good human being, but this is not right. This is not right. But like my mission for attending this conference this year is actually to come at it from an accessibility standpoint. And I'm going to use her conference as an example of what to do and what not to do. And I'm definitely nervous for that.
I was going to say, I've gotten to the space of being unapologetic of who I'm serving, because all of us are navigating spaces that were not built for us. and the intersectionality of our identities. So yes, I serve first generation women. What about everybody else? Everybody else, right? And yes, we make it a very inclusive space, like we were mentioning, right? That it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? Men have attended our events and they have loved it as well, but they have privileges that we do not have as women, and they get to have conversations that we don't, right? So I can imagine for all of us in this intersectionality of where we live of like, okay, but why are we serving this population, or why are we serving this specific? Because we're navigating spaces all these years later in 2025 that were not built for us, where the fact that we have to kind of explain certain things, it seems to be ridiculous, but like you said, it's either if we have the energy to educate to be able to do that and be able to say, hey, I feel sometimes we have a responsibility to, but sometimes you're tired. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of saying certain things, but doing it now in a space of unapologetically, this is who I serve. And even with the Fearless Impact Collective, right? Still new. But as I look at the dream of what I'm building, I want it to be primarily women. I want to have just a wide range of women with different expertise, right? Because what we see statistically is that women are brought in to fix the problem, but we are not quote unquote good enough to be given these CEO roles and all this other stuff. So you know what? I don't want the CEO role and I don't want the big headache. I want to be able to come in as, like everyone's saying, as a consultant. Let me tell you what you're doing wrong. Let me tell you how to fix it. Give me my money and let me go sit back where I belong, right? And go focus on my expertise, right? And I'm thinking of in the future, yes, I'm working right now with middle managers, but be able to have people like Allie and Erin and Sarah being part of a team of like, you have an accessibility problem. Let me call somebody who can tell you what the problem is, right? And then help you fix it, and being able to do that and then step away. Because I think sometimes we try to take on, because of who we are, right? And how we're societal, to take on more than what we need to. And right now, I don't want to fix every problem. I don't want to fix it for everybody. I want to fix it for first generation women. I want to fix it for women. I want to fix it for those that are low income, of marginalized communities. You know what I mean? And if other people get something from it, I am happy. You know, if they want to join us, great. But in general, that is not who I'm serving, because the world has been serving the other folks for a very long time. So I'm not apologizing for it.
I think that's actually like such a perfect kind of key point of the idea of intersectionality, right? What's important is that we are able to talk about where these different identities do intersect. And your organization is such a perfect example. And I mean, Allie, you as well, with like, we're talking about where first generation intersects with being a woman, and we're talking about where disability intersects with being a woman, and that really, if you aren't in the Venn diagram in the intersection, then you don't know. You really don't know. You don't have like the whole picture. You have parts of the picture, and that matters, but you aren't living the same experience. You aren't living the whole experience. And I think that is like a really kind of perfect way to think about it, and that spaces that are specifically for the intersections of our identities are important and necessary and helpful. So I just love that, and I thank you for this conversation and for exploring kind of the murkiness of all of this, the things that people don't want to talk about or don't know how to talk about, or they are afraid of offending people or whatever, and we just like go all in on these conversations. And I just am so proud and grateful and happy to have spaces for conversations like this and friends like you. So thank you for that. As you all three know, I like to end every episode with the same question, which is, it could be work related, but it does not have to be. What is something that is making you happy right now?
This being able to have the opportunity to talk with like-minded folks, to build community, to make sure that we feel seen and heard and validated is so important, because so many of us are in spaces that doesn't do that. So I think this is what makes me happy, that all of us can, regardless of our intersectionalities, be able to say, you know what, this is a problem, and this is how I'm doing my little part in my area to make it better and to educate. Because again, we can't do it all. So it makes my heart happy that there is amazing, fearless trailblazers in different areas killing it. That's what we want. We want the ripple effect, is what I talk about. So it makes me happy.
Yeah, in a similar vein for me, I think what makes me happy is having the opportunity to speak about a lot of the things that I know, like I'm thinking about all the time, but don't necessarily put out into the world in this capacity. So it's really cool to be able to arrive at a conversation and be like, oh no, I actually have a lot of things to say here. So it's validating. So I appreciate, Sarah, that opportunity.
I think like having this kind of conversation and definitely like it is very validating. I hate like repeating the word, but it is because it makes me aware and helps me understand that I'm not alone in this world. And it can kind of feel like that. And just also on a personal note, having very gorgeous weather and still being able to go snowboarding and not having to wear full on winter gear. I love riding, snowboarding in hoodie weather.
I have never been snowboarding. How fun. Okay, I feel like I need to come up with something just as fun now. Ooh, I know what I'm going to say. And you're not going to think this is as fun as snowboarding, but you know what I kind of do? I don't know what this says about me. So we have this small desk that we have in our living room, and we lovingly refer to it as the intern desk, which is, I mean, like we don't have interns, but we just, I don't know where that came from. But anyway, I have my home office that I'm currently in. We have, my partner has an office space designated upstairs that's specifically his, but we have this like kind of extra desk in the living room in case you want to kind of like flexibly work from a different part of the house. And we have been working from that desk a lot more often, both of us recently. And I was like, the only thing is, man, we really need a second monitor, because that is like the biggest thing that always makes me feel like I really should just go in my office, because I can use a bigger screen there and I can have two monitors. So yesterday I added a monitor, and it's a little bigger than I thought it was going to be. I did not get like a huge size. Well, I mean, I guess that's relative, but you know what? I'm not a measurer. I'm a just, just place the order type of person. So we have a monitor out there I worked from that last night. That's actually the picture I posted on Threads. This is coming full circle to the way I opened this episode. Last night, I set everything up with the new monitor, and it's too big. So today we are getting a bigger desk. So I have ordered it and it is coming. So now basically we're just gonna have a like third office area in our house in the living room to be able to flex. But it's nice because if we're not both working at the same time and one of us is wanting to watch TV or like read or whatever, hang out in the living room, then the other person can still be in the same room as them, even though they have to work, which is really, I think, a nice thing. So, anyways, I'm very excited about it. It like makes me want to work in the living room, which is really funny. I told my partner Eric next, I feel like I need to add a webcam and a microphone. I was like, what if I want to take everything out there? Which is absolutely absurd. So far we're not doing that, but we'll see. Anyways, thank you all for being here. Thank you for continuing to join me for Big Brave Conversations. I hope you'll all be back. And that includes you listening. I hope you'll be back. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next week.